Hi, everyone. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. The moment my girlfriend told me that boys were begging for her and she could walk away anytime she wanted, I realized our 2-year relationship had never been about love at all. It had been about control, validation, and power games that I had been too invested to recognize. Instead of the panic and desperation she was clearly expecting, I simply smiled, handed her coat and bag, and pointed toward the door. The look of complete shock on her face told me everything I needed to know about how this relationship had really been working. Madison and I had met 2 years earlier at our company's annual holiday party, where she worked in customer relations and I was in marketing analytics. She was undeniably attractive in a way that commanded attention in any room she entered. Tall, blonde, with the kind of confidence that made people gravitate toward her whether they intended to or not. During our first conversation at the party, I was struck by how easily she could shift between charming small talk with colleagues and deeper discussions about career ambitions and life goals. What I noticed immediately about Madison was how comfortable she seemed with the constant attention she received from men. Throughout that first evening, I watched various guys from different departments find reasons to approach her, offer to refresh her drink, or insert themselves into whatever conversation she was having. Rather than seeming annoyed or uncomfortable with this attention, Madison appeared to thrive on it, responding to each interaction with a kind of warm engagement that kept these men orbiting around her throughout the night. When Madison gave me her number at the end of the party, I felt like I had won some kind of competition, though I wasn't entirely sure what the prize was or what I had done to earn it. Our first few dates confirmed my initial impression that Madison was someone who was accustomed to being pursued and admired, and who had developed sophisticated skills for managing the multiple streams of male attention that seemed to flow toward her constantly. During our early months together, I was fascinated by Madison's social dynamics and her apparent need to maintain connections with numerous men who were clearly interested in her romantically. Her phone would buzz constantly with messages from colleagues, former classmates, and men she had met through various social activities. When I asked about these communications, Madison would explain that she believed in maintaining friendships with everyone and that cutting people off just because they found her attractive seemed unnecessarily harsh. Madison had a way of framing her interactions with other men that made my discomfort seem unreasonable and controlling. She would point out that she had been honest about these friendships from the beginning of our relationship, and that my jealousy was evidence of insecurity rather than legitimate concerns about appropriate boundaries. According to Madison, her ability to maintain platonic friendships with men who were attracted to her was actually a sign of her maturity and social sophistication. What I failed to recognize during those early months was that Madison's need for constant validation from multiple men was creating a dynamic where I was always competing for her attention and approval rather than building a partnership based on mutual commitment and respect. Madison seemed to enjoy watching me try to distinguish myself from the other men who were pursuing her, and she had developed subtle ways of encouraging that competition without explicitly acknowledging what she was doing. As our relationship progressed through its first year, Madison and I settled into routines that reflected our decision to take things slowly and build a solid foundation before making major commitments like moving in together or getting engaged. We had agreed that we would wait until we were ready for marriage before combining our living situations, partly because we both valued our independence, and partly because I wanted to establish better financial security before taking on the responsibilities of supporting a household. This arrangement suited both of us initially, giving us the excitement of dating while maintaining the stability of our individual lives and careers. Madison kept her apartment across town, and I remained in the condo I had bought 2 years before we met. We would spend weekends together, alternating between our places depending on our schedules and social plans, and we would meet for dinner or activities during the week when our work schedules allowed. But as we moved into our second year together, I began to notice changes in Madison's behavior that suggested she was becoming less satisfied with the pace and structure of our relationship. She started making comments about couples we knew who had moved in together or gotten engaged more quickly, wondering aloud why we were taking so long to make similar commitments. When I would explain my reasons for wanting to establish better financial security and advance further in my career before taking those steps, Madison would accuse me of making excuses and not being serious about our future together. Around the time of our second anniversary, Madison began engaging in what I now recognize as deliberate power plays designed to test my commitment and create anxiety about the security of our relationship. She would mention other men who had asked her out or expressed interest in dating her, not because she was considering their offers, but because she enjoyed watching my reaction and seeing me work to reassure myself about her loyalty. Madison also started making subtle criticisms about my romantic efforts, comparing me unfavorably to men who had sent her flowers, planned elaborate dates, or made grand gestures to demonstrate their interest in her. She would describe these other men's efforts in detail, always concluding that while she appreciated their attention, she had chosen to be with me instead. But the subtext was always that I needed to work harder to deserve her continued presence in my life. These conversations began to create a constant underlying tension in our relationship, where I felt like I was always being evaluated and compared to other options that Madison had available to her. Rather than feeling secure in our commitment to each other, I found myself constantly trying to prove that I was worthy of her attention and that our relationship was more valuable than whatever alternatives she was considering. The pattern became more pronounced as I started working longer hours to position myself for a promotion that would significantly increase my salary and improve our long-term financial prospects. I had explained to Madison that this promotion was an important step toward achieving the stability I wanted before we got married and moved in together, but she seemed to interpret my career focus as evidence that I wasn't prioritizing our relationship appropriately. During this period of increased work demands, Madison's comments about other men's attention became more frequent and more pointed. She would tell me about colleagues who had offered to take her to lunch, classmates from college who had reached out to suggest dinner, and neighbors who had found excuses to start conversations with her. Each of these stories was presented as evidence of her desirability and as an implicit reminder that I needed to work harder to keep her interested in our relationship. What I found most troubling about these interactions was how much Madison seemed to enjoy creating anxiety and uncertainty about her commitment to our relationship. She would watch my face carefully when she described other men's interest in her, apparently taking pleasure in any signs of discomfort or jealousy that I might display. When I would ask her to be more mindful about encouraging attention from men who were clearly interested in her romantically, Madison would accuse me of being controlling and insecure. The situation escalated significantly when I began to notice that Madison was actively encouraging some of these interactions rather than simply receiving unwanted attention from persistent men. She would respond enthusiastically to flirtatious messages, agree to one-on-one meetings with men who were obviously interested in her, and share personal details about our relationship with other men in ways that seemed designed to create opportunities for them to offer alternative perspectives or support. One evening in particular, I witnessed an interaction that made the nature of Madison's behavior unmistakably clear. We were having dinner at her apartment when her phone buzzed with a message that made her smile in a way that seemed too intimate for casual friendship. When I asked who had texted her, Madison quickly turned her phone face down and claimed it was just a work-related message that wasn't important. But I had been quick enough to see that the message was from a colleague from my own department, who I knew had been flirting with Madison at the office for months. The preview of the message that I had glimpsed suggested that their communication was far more personal and flirtatious than Madison had ever acknowledged, and her immediate defensive reaction confirmed that she knew the interaction was inappropriate. When I asked Madison to show me the message thread with Ryan, she became immediately angry and accused me of not trusting her and trying to invade her privacy. She insisted that her communications with other people were none of my business, and that my request to see her phone was evidence of controlling behavior that she wouldn't tolerate in our relationship. I explained to Madison that I wasn't trying to control her communications with other people, but rather that I was uncomfortable with the apparent intimacy of her interaction with this coworker and wanted to understand the nature of their relationship. I pointed out that this coworker was someone I worked with directly, and that his flirtatious behavior toward my girlfriend was creating an awkward situation for me both professionally and personally. Madison's response was to double down on her refusal to show me the messages, claiming that my insecurity about her friendships with other men was my problem to solve rather than something she needed to accommodate. She accused me of being jealous and possessive, and suggested that if I couldn't trust her to maintain appropriate boundaries with other men, then perhaps I wasn't mature enough for a serious relationship. The conversation reached a breaking point when I told Madison that I needed her to be transparent about her communication with the coworker, or our relationship would be over. I explained that trust requires honesty, and that her refusal to address my concerns was making it impossible for me to feel secure in our commitment to each other. Madison's reaction to this ultimatum revealed everything I needed to know about how she viewed our relationship and my place in her life. Instead of recognizing the seriousness of my concerns or attempting to rebuild trust through transparency, she laughed dismissively and told me that she could walk away from our relationship anytime she wanted because boys were begging for her attention. Her tone wasn't frustrated or defensive. It was smug and confident, as if she was playing a card that she expected would immediately end the conversation in her favor. Madison clearly believed that reminding me of her other options would make me back down from my request for honesty and transparency. She seemed to think that the threat of losing her would be enough to make me accept whatever boundaries she chose to set around her relationships with other men. But in that moment, something fundamental shifted in my understanding of what our relationship had been and what Madison actually thought of me. I realized that she had been using the attention she received from other men as a weapon to control my behavior and keep me competing for her affection rather than building genuine intimacy and partnership with me. Instead of the panic, pleading, or anger that Madison was clearly expecting, I felt a strange sense of clarity and relief. Her words had finally made explicit what had been implicit in our relationship for months, that she viewed me as one of many options rather than as someone she was committed to building a future with. My response was to smile calmly and tell Madison that she was absolutely right about being able to walk away and that there was an exit if that was what she wanted to do. I stood up, collected her coat and purse from where she had left them when she arrived, and handed them to her while pointing toward the door of my apartment. Madison's reaction was complete shock and confusion. She had clearly expected my ultimatum about transparency to be a bluff that she could call by threatening to leave, and she was completely unprepared for my willingness to actually end our relationship rather than continuing to compete for her attention. For several seconds, Madison stood in my living room holding her coat and purse, apparently waiting for me to back down or begin the kind of pleading negotiation that she had probably experienced with me in the past when I had challenged her behavior. When it became clear that I was serious about ending our relationship, she walked toward the door in a daze, still seeming to expect that I would stop her before she actually left. As Madison reached the door, I simply said goodbye and closed it behind her, then returned to my evening routine without looking back or second-guessing my decision. For the first time in months, I felt like I was acting from a position of self-respect rather than fear of losing someone who had been manipulating my emotions and testing my boundaries. The days following our breakup confirmed that Madison had indeed expected me to chase after her and beg for another chance to prove my worth. She didn't call or text immediately, apparently believing that I would reach out first to apologize for my ultimatum and ask her to reconsider her decision to leave. When I maintained complete silence for a full week, including avoiding unnecessary interactions with her at work, Madison began sending text messages that revealed her growing confusion about my lack of pursuit. Her first messages were testing whether I was serious about the breakup, asking if I really intended to end our 2-year relationship over what she characterized as a minor disagreement about privacy and trust. When I didn't respond to these initial messages, Madison's tone shifted to expressions of disbelief that I could be so uncaring about our relationship and our shared history. She seemed genuinely surprised that I wasn't fighting for her or trying to negotiate a compromise that would allow us to get back together without addressing the fundamental issues that had led to our breakup. As the second week of silence continued, Madison's messages became more frequent and more desperate. She began acknowledging that she might have been wrong about some aspects of our argument, and suggested that we could work through our problems if I was willing to communicate with her about what I needed from our relationship. During this period, Madison also began engaging in increasingly obvious attempts to provoke a reaction from me through social media and our mutual workplace connections. She posted photos of herself, apparently hoping that I would see them and become jealous enough to reach out to her. She also started finding excuses to visit my department at work, creating opportunities for brief interactions that might lead to longer conversations about our relationship. Madison enlisted mutual friends and colleagues to gather information about whether I was dating anyone else or seemed interested in reconciling with her. These friends would casually ask about my social life and relationship status, clearly fishing for information that they could report back to Madison about my emotional state and availability. What Madison discovered through these inquiries was that I seemed to be moving on with my life rather than pining for her or regretting my decision to end our relationship. I was focusing on my work, spending time with friends, and generally appearing to be content with being single rather than desperately seeking a replacement for what we had shared together. After 3 weeks of escalating attempts to reconnect with me, Madison finally called late one evening when I was reviewing reports for a presentation I was giving the next day. Against my better judgment, I answered the phone, curious to hear what she might say after weeks of silence and indirect communication attempts. Madison's voice was completely different from the confident, smug tone she had used during our final argument. She sounded genuinely distressed as she told me that she had made a mistake and wanted to talk about rebuilding our relationship. She claimed that she had been testing me to see how much I cared about her, and that she hadn't expected me to actually walk away when she threatened to leave. Madison admitted that she had thought I would fight for her and try to convince her to stay, which would have proven that I valued our relationship more than my need to control her friendships with other men. She explained that her refusal to show me the messages from the coworker had been about maintaining her independence rather than hiding anything inappropriate, though she acknowledged that her communication with him had probably crossed boundaries that were important to me. Most revealingly, Madison confessed that she had enjoyed the attention she received from other men partly because it made her feel more desirable and partly because it seemed to make me more attentive and affectionate toward her. She had been using the threat of other men's interest as a way to keep me invested in proving my commitment to our relationship. I listened to Madison's explanations and apologies with a mixture of sadness and relief. Her willingness to finally be honest about her motivations confirmed that my decision to end our relationship had been correct, even though it was painful to learn that someone I had cared about had been manipulating my emotions so deliberately. When Madison finished her explanation and asked for another chance to rebuild our relationship on a more honest foundation, I told her that love shouldn't be a power game where one person constantly tests the other's commitment through threats and manipulation. I explained that her behavior had shown me exactly how much I had meant to her, not as a partner she was committed to, but as someone she could control through emotional manipulation and fear of abandonment. Madison began pleading for an opportunity to prove that she could change, and that she was ready to prioritize our relationship over the validation she received from other men. She promised to be more transparent about her communications with other people and to establish clearer boundaries with men who were interested in her romantically. But I had already realized that the fundamental problem wasn't Madison's specific behaviors, but her approach to relationships as competitions where she needed to maintain power and control rather than building genuine intimacy and partnership. Someone who thought that threatening to leave was an appropriate way to resolve conflicts about trust and honesty wasn't someone I could build a healthy future with. My final response to Madison was to acknowledge that she was right about boys begging for her attention, but to clarify that I wasn't one of them and never would be. I told her that she deserved to find someone who would compete for her attention in the way she seemed to need, and that I deserved to find someone who was interested in building a partnership based on mutual respect and commitment rather than power games and emotional manipulation. I ended the call by telling Madison that there was nothing left for us to discuss, and that I hoped she would learn from our experience about the difference between love and control. Then I hung up and blocked her number, feeling lighter and more hopeful about my future than I had felt in months. The experience taught me important lessons about recognizing manipulation in relationships and the importance of maintaining self-respect, even when it means walking away from someone you care about. Madison's approach to our relationship had been designed to keep me in a constant state of insecurity and competition, which prevented the development of genuine trust and intimacy between us. I learned that healthy relationships require partners who are committed to building something together rather than maintaining power over each other. Madison's need to keep multiple men competing for her attention had made it impossible for us to develop the kind of exclusive emotional bond that serious partnerships require. Most importantly, I discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to participate in someone else's power games, even when that means ending a relationship that has been important to you. Madison's threat to walk away had finally given me permission to choose my own self-respect over her need for control and validation. The months following our breakup confirmed that I had made the right decision. Without the constant stress of competing for Madison's attention and trying to prove my worth to someone who was actively undermining our relationship, I was able to focus on personal and professional goals that had been neglected during our time together. I eventually learned through workplace gossip that Madison had begun dating another guy shortly after our breakup, which confirmed that her communications with some of the people who flirted with her had indeed been inappropriate and that my concerns about her relationship had been justified. The fact that she had moved on so quickly also validated my assessment that our relationship had never been as important to her as the power and control she had derived from it. Looking back, I realized that Madison's declaration that boys were begging for her was actually one of the most honest things she ever said to me. It revealed how she viewed relationships as competitions where her desirability gave her power over men who were desperate for her attention. By refusing to be one of those men, I had finally freed myself from a dynamic that was preventing both of us from finding the kind of love we actually needed. The moment when I pointed Madison toward the door was the moment I chose self-respect over desperation, and it remains one of the best decisions I have ever made. Sometimes, the most powerful response to someone's threat to leave is simply to open the door and let them go.